All right, what is up guys? Aldo here. I'm outside on my balcony. I wanted to do another vlog for you guys. Hope you enjoy it. When I was a freshman in high school, I remember I was talking with a few of my kind of newly made friends. You know, when you go to high school, a lot of times you may not know anybody. I went to a private high school, went to public middle school, elementary school before then, and a few of the kids that I made friends with a few months prior, probably, if I remember correctly, this is over 10 years ago now. We were talking about, you know, like what we wanted to do, you know, for careers when we were adults. And I think, I don't remember it like specifically like everything I said or everything I talked about, but there are a few different options I talked about. One was being like a news anchor. I think the second one was being like a weatherman, a weather forecaster. And the third was being like something in investment, something in stocks. At that time, I knew nothing about the stock market. I knew nothing about crypto. That was like 2011 at that time, 2012, 2011. So yeah, I didn't know what Bitcoin was until around 2014, I think. But said that, and then I remember kind of the feedback I got from these the two kids, and I think their view on like investing was like very risky. You lose all your money. That was that view. That was like post, like if you guys really, like if you've been in the game for a while, and you probably only have if you're older, you know, you probably only have if you're, you know, been following it for a few years, you're probably got to be in your like, you know, 40s or 50s or something like that. The general view of the stock market was much more risky 10 years ago. It was a much different like ballpark. Like 2011, like post 08, before you were coming back, 2011, 2012, when you weren't really doing much. You know, you came down and then you were, you know, it took some years before you really had that V-shaped recovery in the S&P 500. But the amount of fear, the amount of negativity towards the stock market at that time, towards investing, was incrementally like 10 times what it is now. Even with like a lot of people predicting recession, even with a lot of people predicting doom and gloom, even with a lot of people, you know, saying DXY is going to go up, saying, you know, S&P 500 is going to crash, all that. Even with all that, the fear was still, from what I remember, I mean, I was very young, but from what I remember, the fear was much higher kind of back then than it is now. And ultimately, you know, people were very afraid. I remember because my father used to like sell, I think it was annuities, and he was trying to like talk to somebody about it, and then they were like, no, market's going to go down farther, market's going to crash. You know, the fear about the stock market was just insanely high back then, if you guys kind of remember it. And then that was after a decade. Obviously 2001 wasn't too good. That whole decade was not a good decade at all for the stock market. Double top pattern, you know, the first top was 01 or 2000, whatever, around there. The second top was 07. And then you came down farther, but then this decade was one of the best decades in the stock market's history, in the S&P 500's history, I believe, since the Great Depression. One of the best decades in terms of ROI, obviously. And, you know, that's kind of just how the fear of, you know, kind of how unpredictable life is, kind of how the fear of things, you know, the notion to kind of get in when everybody's afraid, you know, those who are rewarded. It's kind of that era. And what I want to talk about, I don't want to make this whole video like about, you know, the stock market, about, you know, all that, investing. I mean, that's what we do in the live streams or the pre-recorded videos. But what I want to kind of talk about is, you know, so what were the three things I talked about? I talked about forecasting, it was weather forecasting. I talked about potentially like doing the news anchoring. And I also talked about something in finance. That's all what I do about 12 years later. Those are all the things that I do. It actually feels like longer ago, like that time when I was in high school. Like it feels like longer than 10 years ago. Like it feels like 20, I don't know. But, you know, it kind of feels like longer. And it's kind of like the things you visualize, especially when you're younger, the things you see yourself as, you eventually become. And a lot of people don't really realize this, but once you do realize this, I think it can be something that ultimately helps you if you know how to control your thoughts, if you know how to control the way things go. And another thing that I was learning today, I was watching one of Jake Ducey's like latest video. He's had some good content pretty recently. in terms of LOA, and he said kind of, you know, you got to think of like, what if the best thing happens? You know, what people are always thinking like the worst case scenario. What if the best thing happens? That's kind of how you get your joy in your life, because everything you do has an uncertain outcome. You know, if you start a business, you know, you make a trade, you invest in something. Everything you do that has an undetermined outcome. You don't know. It's all a game of probability. You know what most likely will happen, but you don't know exactly what will happen. And there are certain things like that you really don't know the probability for. Like, you really don't know that if you start this business or if you write this book, you don't know how many people are going to be into it. You don't know how many people are going to buy it. You don't know. You don't know, you know, what's going to happen. If he was talking about, you know, how he was, I think, in college, and he was bored with it, I guess unengaged, and he wanted to backpack around the world and write a book about it. And then I think he ended up doing that, and he went to Thailand. He did like a 14-day silent meditation retreat. I did one for 5 days a few months back and earlier this year, and wow, yeah, it's tough. That stuff is tough, definitely, especially in our, you know, modern day with all the dopamine and all that, and you're just like sitting there, and especially like you know, especially your back's hurting you, your neck's hurting you, all that. Definitely challenging, but I think you could ultimately get something through it. I mean, people say, you know, 7-day ones, 10-day ones, stuff like that could ultimately help. I mean, it's a big dopamine reset. And there's, you know, I don't think you necessarily have to do something like that to gain the benefits from it. But, you know, when you're young, when you have those opportunities, when you have those freedoms, you got to think about it too. Elon Musk talked about this. I remember, because, you know, a few years ago when I was like working a normal job, you know, just like kind of an average guy or whatever, I was listening to Elon Musk. I would listen to a lot of motivational stuff. I would watch a lot of YouTube videos. I would watch a lot of people who, you know, kind of escaped the 9-to-5, kind of had their own businesses, essentially. A lot of content creators I watched and read about, and, you know, kind of wanted to learn what they did, you know, how they figured it out. And a few of them, I remember Jesse James West I watched. He had one good video where when I lived in LA, I actually worked out at that Zoo Culture gym. If you guys are familiar with like fitness, YouTube, Bradley Martin, the gym he owns. And I used to see Jesse James. I used to see a lot of the influencers that worked out there and like filmed content there. And he was one who said like, yeah, I mean, I started this like a year ago and now I have like almost 1 million subscribers. Like, your life can change in 1 year. So I knew it was possible. And there was another guy I used to, that's what's wild too. Like, a lot of content creators, more than you would think, have just fallen off the face of the earth. They made enough money and retired, or they quit, you know, or some other reason. But ultimately, I think that's more opportunity if you want to become a content creator, because it seems all oversaturated. I know Hamza was talking about this, you know, everybody told him, you know, self-development, so it's such an oversaturated, you know, kind of industry. It's such an oversaturated kind of industry, you know, how are you going to branch out? And then he was able to do it. He was able to branch out. And I think it's not really oversaturated. There's people leaving and people quitting all the time. And that's where you kind of have that opportunity to get in. Nothing lasts forever. No one does a certain thing forever. Certain people will retire, they'll get sick of it, they'll make enough money, then they'll try something else. Like, nothing, there's only like, what's that like principle? There's like causes and conditions or something, everything's temporary, something like that. And I think ultimately that is very, very true. You know, that is ultimately very true. And another thing too, this is slightly off topic, but I just had this thought, like, you got to take time to just come outside and observe. I mean, okay, you may not live in a nice city like this where, you know, it's beautiful, perfect weather, and it does rain a lot, but perfect weather all year long, beach in Miami. But I'm sure there's something where you do live that you can observe, you know, some nature. There's some nature trail, something like that. You got to take time for that. Even take time to, you know, just reflect and do content like yourself. I mean, a part of the reason why I do these videos is because, you know, ultimately, a lot of times, like, you could have conversations with people and you could talk to people and you could convey this information to people. This is information, you know, that a lot of times I like to convey to people. But sometimes it's tough to like talk to people, especially if you're talking to a lot of people at once, you know. It's hard to really, because everybody, you know, not to say they're interrupting you, but sometimes, you know, they're talking about this and it gets all off topic and then you're just moving around. It's not as focused. So when you have these like long form things like this, I'm able to really, you know, kind of convey the message, which is really, really good. It's kind of the leverage, you know, with the internet, we have that leverage. We have that huge amount of leverage. That's how, like, people like Alex Becker or Alex Hermosi were able to, you know, become worth over $100 million in their 30s. I think that would have been much harder kind of in the 1980s to, you know, to do something like that. And, you know, it's the leverage we have with the internet. And maybe, you know, in certain ways, like how it was before the internet, maybe it could have benefited you because there was maybe a little less competition for certain jobs, certain things. But I think ultimately now, you know, you just got to adapt to it. And I think it could kind of, I think as time goes on, well, one of my good friends used to tell me, you know, look, I mean, you could compare yourself to the 1980s. You can say, you know, the job market's tougher now, this and that. But look, I mean, with the technology and everything, I think ultimately life gets better over time. And I think he's right. I think he was ultimately right about that. And, you know, ultimately when you're trying to do, you know, trying to get something done that you really want to get done in your life, you know, there's a lot of procrastination. And Andrew Kirby, which is another amazing YouTuber that you guys should check out. I'm not like paid to like talk about any of these people. They're just people that I've watched and learned a lot from. These people are, I think, pretty much how I'll have enough money to retire. They're not really, you know, they don't really have any type of motivation, I think, to even have more people watch them, in my opinion. I mean, I'm sure it's nice, but, you know. And he talked about, you know, in one of his, it was like a YouTube short, I think, and I'm not the biggest fan of shorts because I don't think it's, you know, just bits and pieces of information. But he said, like, procrastination is more of a fear of failure because you're kind of, it's kind of a fear of failure a lot of times. And that really resonated with me because I used to always think procrastination is just laziness. You just don't want to do the hard work, you know what I mean? You're just too freaking lazy. You just are like, oh, this is too hard. I don't want to do it. I'm too late. That's what I always viewed it as. I just didn't have the discipline. If I was progressing, I would always feel like, oh man, I'm just not disciplined enough. Oh well, you know. But I think it ultimately, I mean, it can be a lack of discipline. I'm sure it still can be, but I think a lot of it is just fear of failure. Like a lot of people would say, like, I need to study more. I need to do this more. I need to learn more before I, you know, start this business. Before I do that. Before I do this. But really, in a lot of ways, like nobody knows, you know, exactly when they're ready, and you don't know kind of the outcome of what you do. Like, sure, you may fail, but I mean, there's a lot of like people, a lot of smart, successful people that will tell you, look, failure is not, you know, the worst thing in the world. I think the people that succeeded the most have failed the most. Like, look at anybody. Like, they've made a lot of mistakes and they've kind of, you know, screwed up in a lot of ways. And I think, you know, they were able to learn from that. And this is like kind of stuff that you probably have already heard like many times. You know, you mess up, you learn from, you know, that mistake and build upon it. And I think that's ultimately a pretty important thing. I mean, ultimately pretty important thing, especially just to, you know, observe what you did in previous times, observe what's around you. And, you know, the days are short, but the decades are long. The days are short, the decades are long. The days, they go by slow. You know, you're waiting for the week to be over. You're waiting for, you know, you get done with your job. You're waiting to go home for the weekends. You could, I don't know, you know, just relax or whatever. I mean, some people like to go out, party, all that. I did that a little bit. I didn't really, I mean, I went, people, if you're curious about that too, like in terms of like, I went to the University of Miami for college, obviously a college with a lot of fraternities, a lot of things to do, things like that, parties. And I did go out a little bit, not that much. Even when after that, I did go out, I experienced it. It wasn't something I was like that into. And a lot of people are talking about more like against alcohol, against drinking now. And I think that's, especially Alex Becker has. And I think that's in the right direction generally. You know, I think that's in the right direction generally. Obviously everything in moderation, a couple drinks here and there isn't going to do anything. But, you know, I think that's kind of in the right direction. I think it's hard enough to focus and hard enough to get something done when you're kind of doing, you know, when you're all focused and your brain's where it wants to be. You get what I'm saying? Like, it's hard enough to accomplish these things when everything's going the right way. Why make it kind of harder than it has to be in a certain sense? But kind of going back to the, you know, the procrastination, you know, kind of thing, ultimately that focus, yeah, that's the thing too. Like if you're because you got your normal job and then you maybe have some time on the weekends, but maybe you just like how it is too, like human willpower. That's why a lot of people like, they'll outsource a lot of things. Like they'll outsource a lot of stuff. Like outsourcing, some people would think, if you're not familiar, like outsourcing doesn't mean hiring people out of the country that you live in. It could mean, you know, hiring somebody to, you know, even if you use, I don't know, like delivery, groceries, or something like that to just save the time of buying groceries. That's kind of outsourcing, you know what I mean? You're hiring somebody to save your time. And a lot of people have talked about this. Obviously, you know, rich people spend money to save time. Poor people spend time, sell their time for money. You know, what is your most valuable asset? It's time. And why is it? Why is that? Why is time your most valuable asset? It's because you only have so much of it left. You know, money is a very big piece. Money is definitely a lot of your freedom. Like, the more money you have, the more opportunities come, and it's an amazing, amazing thing, honestly. If you know how to use it right, it's like anything else. It can be used, anything in the world can be abused, used wrong. You know, it could absolutely make your life worse if you let it. You know what I mean? You have to be considerate about it. But if you know how to use it well, like, that amount of freedom with it is just ultimately, like, insanely empowering, and it means a lot. Like, because you think too, like, there's a lot of people that say, like, money doesn't mean that much, you know, I don't care about money, but none of those people really have that much money. But at the same time, like, obviously, if you have, you know, 30 days to live and you're dying of, like, some rare cancer or rare disease, you would probably give away most, if not all, of your money to cure that. So we're not at the point where AI, you know, we haven't cured, you know, we're not at the point where it's completely there yet, but we're not at the point where you could buy, you know, spend all your net worth to kind of save yourself. Usually you're not kind of, you know what I mean? Usually there's not that many, you know, places in life where you have $3 million and you have to spend it all to kind of save your life or something. That doesn't happen too often. Usually it's a point where you have the bad thing happen, and then the money could kind of help you, you know, kind of help that and provide more opportunities for that, typically. You know, that's what I would say about it. And ultimately, I think that, you know, it's a great thing, and I think it's just the way you get more, because a lot of people will, you know, a lot of people ask me too, because a lot of people with 9-to-5 jobs, obviously, you dread kind of, and I know it too, like, it's probably what you experience since you're, I mean, I remember experiencing this when I was maybe like in kindergarten, 5 or 6 years old. Like, you know, when you're saying, I don't want to go to school, you know, you kind of dread having to wake up at a certain time, being at a certain time, a certain place at a certain time. I mean, when you're a young child, you want to kind of play more, run around. And I think Naval Ravikant has actually talked about this, how, like, even people who are completely uneducated a lot of times, like, they're not even that far behind in terms of, like, their general knowledge of people who did the whole 18 years in school and all of that. I'd have to read more about that, but it is interesting. And then it's the same thing towards, like, kind of having a job. I remember, because college, okay, so you have, you know, school, like high school, and that's similar to kind of a 9-to-5 job in a lot of ways. Like, you show up, you be there at a certain place, you got to sit there, do your job, you know, do what's required of you, the work or whatever, and then you do more stuff at home. Kind of a 9-to-5 job is a lot like that. You got to show up, you got to do the things you're required to do. Then you'll do more stuff at home sometimes. It's kind of like a school without homework a little bit. I mean, I went to a good high school. I worked very hard in high school, so it depends. I mean, I'm sure some of you guys, you know, kind of didn't really do too much in high school. It was just a lot of fun. You know, I mean, some people I knew went to public high schools, you know, or even the private high school I went to. Like, they weren't in the hard classes there, and they just you know, they were able to not have to do that much homework, not really study. Maybe, you know, all they had to really do is show up, and then outside of that, they did sports or they had fun or some things like that. And that's probably what, honestly, in hindsight, that might have been the better way to do it. Like, because my freshman year of high school, I kind of just slacked off. I was just in average classes, you know. I did the minimum effort to get, like, B's, which wasn't that much, and I would actually learn about kind of installing, like, Linux operating systems on computers. I was more nerdy back then because I had more free time. Like, I did cross country and that was an amazing, like, when I look back, you kind of forget about it, like, as years go by, like, the best, you know, periods of your life. That was one of them. Probably freshman year of high school was one of them, because I was on the track team, cross country team. I made a lot of new friends, and then I was doing, like, and instead of doing homework or monotonous things I didn't want to do, I was doing, like, things I like to do, like Linux. I don't know if I made YouTube videos back then. I definitely did some screen recordings, like how to do stuff on Linux or whatever, but after that, I wanted to go to a really good college, like the University of Miami or something. And you would say, oh, maybe you don't have to work that hard to get in there. I mean, you kind of did ultimately in terms of grades at the school, you know, in terms of like what I had to do to get in there. And then, so I worked really hard to get into like the honors classes and all that, like my sophomore year of high school, and then on and onward, you know, into the senior year. And I didn't have time to like do my hobbies as much. I was just doing a lot of like monotonous homework and studying and all that stuff. And I mean, maybe some of those things, I probably use more of the things I learned like in college when I majored in broadcast journalism in the work I do now, rather than the stuff I learned kind of in high school in terms of like math or, you know, so science was interesting. I think there's some, you know, some use case there, but in terms of most of it, like it's not that like useful. I mean, maybe the history aspects, that was the stuff I hated in high school too, but just looking back, like it's not that much different than really a 9-to-5 job. And then what I want to talk about here in college, when you get to college, you have more freedom, and some people kind of abuse that, you know, they're just partying, all that. But when I was in college, it was more freedom, but I made it kind of hard because I wanted to kind of be a really good student and learn and do all that type of stuff. I didn't really know what I wanted to study. I was broadcast journalism and political science, but it was still a lot of stuff that I kind of dreaded doing that I really didn't want to do, but they all both had their things. But now kind of, because that's the thing too, like everybody in the modern day, like I'd say 98% of people, and the reason I come up with this quote is because of what Napoleon Hill says in the book Outwitting the Devil. It's like 98% of, it's all allegory, you know, it's all metaphor, you know. 98% of people are controlled by the devil. 98% of people aren't doing what they truly want to do. And I think I would be in that top 2% that kind of, to a certain extent, I don't really dread the things I do for the most part. Like if you're wondering what my lifestyle kind of is, and what I think the lifestyle of like a lot of successful people that you would see on the internet, not all of them, but I mean, probably a lot of them is kind of, or at least high income earners, I would say, is they don't really dread most of the things they're doing. They don't really like think like, oh man, I hate how I have to wake up for that tomorrow, right? I mean, sometimes you feel that like a little bit, like there's certain things you would prefer to not do over others, but you don't really dread doing it. Like when you're kind of doing things in your passion, you don't really dread, like I don't really dread doing most of the things that I do. Some of them I do, like some of them are really annoying, but I don't really dread doing them like I would dread writing, say, a 5 or 10 page paper, you know, when I was in high school or college or something like that. That's kind of the difference here. And I think when you kind of escape the matrix or escape the 9-to-5, you don't have to, that's the analogy. Like, let's just forget about money for a second. The analogy is not having to really do really anything you didn't want to do. And I don't think it's as hard as, like, if you really get into the right mindset and you really like feel like you desired something, feel like you accomplished something, you feel like you deserve something, and you know, like Bob Proctor says, like it's your birthright to be rich. You probably grew up, you know, with people telling you, you know, well, you don't deserve that. You're never going to be that. You're lucky if you work this job for all these years and you get this. I mean, I would say if you're going to be telling, you know, your children that or something like that, you probably shouldn't have children. You probably shouldn't have kids because if you think it's that bad, you probably shouldn't expand consciousness, which sadly a lot of people aren't having kids anymore. So you're kind of, you know, I feel like they're kind of following that logic to a certain extent. And then, I mean, you look at also, I think Jake Ducey talked about when he was, he went to like Guatemala when he was younger, and he saw, you know, it was one of the poorest countries in the world, I think, at the time. I don't know if it still is, but he saw how like people didn't really have anything, but they had more, they had happiness, you know, they had happiness. So in that sense, you know, it doesn't really, that's kind of there's the wealthy side of escaping the matrix, and then the non-wealthy side of kind of, they're more, obviously it's better to be wealthy, don't get me wrong here, but there's that like kind of side where even though they don't really have much, the lives they live, they don't have to do too much they don't want to do. I think, I don't know, don't get mad at me if I'm kind of wrong in this, but the bottom line is like they're happy, you know, they don't have really anything, but they have a sense of purpose, you know what I mean? Or I guess it's that, I don't know, but that's the main point there. You know, it's kind of all relative. And then, you know, there's those traps you kind of fall into society. You know, you're in that 9-to-5 job, this or that, you kind of fall into kind of those traps. And like Bob Proctor says, it's your birthright to be rich. It's your birthright. And that doesn't mean be entitled and just expect everything handed to you. It's your birthright to be able to do generally what you want to do. It's your birthright to be able to get kind of the money you want and to feel, you know, to have the vision that you're ultimately looking at. You know, you deserve the things you want. And, you know, there's so many people that accomplish things, like, we underestimate ourselves. Ultimately, you know, our self-esteem, we underestimate ourselves so much. I mean, there's even the view that, like, most people quit right before they were going to succeed. And I think that's very true. What was the actor who does, I forget the name off the top of my head, but the actor who plays Jim from The Office, I think he said, like, he was almost going to quit right before he got the, you know, the audition to be Jim in The Office, to play that character. He was almost going to quit. Like, there's a lot of, you know, people, that's weird how that happens. I don't know if that's, you could really, it's probably pseudoscience. Like, it's probably something you can't exactly, like, prove, you know, whether a person would have, you know, been successful every time, you know, right after they quit, a little bit after. But it is very, you know, very, very interesting to kind of look at that, you know, that type of view in it. But I think ultimately, you know, the most important thing is the positivity there. Like Bob Proctor says, he even wrote, I read his book too. I don't think it's the greatest book on, like, law of attraction. It's called You Were Born Rich. But I think I definitely learned something from it. And, you know, I think that's a good notion. Like, you just got to remember, like, when you're feeling negative, when you're feeling down, like, it's your birthright. Like, it's like, even if you're not going to succeed, that's what I would always think to myself. Like, even if this is all a waste of time, even if it's not going to succeed at it, like, I still might as well try. You know what I mean? It's kind of like Remember the Alamo. Like, you have no chance of winning the fight, but you're still going to try. You know what I mean? You're still going to, just out of the courage of it, you're still going to kind of try, because you just want to show that you tried. I mean, that's kind of maybe your legacy too. Even if you didn't succeed, you kind of tried. And that's ultimately, you know, another important thing is, like, you know, a lot of people want to leave, like, a legacy. You know, you want to be remembered. I mean, that's the kind of the people we remember thousands of years later, obviously for good things, not for bad things. There's certain people that will probably be remembered in thousands of years for bad things they did. You want to be remembered for good things. I mean, keep that in mind. But ultimately, I think that's kind of that legacy. And ultimately, you know, just keep trying to learn. That's a really important thing. I remember the last thing I'll kind of leave you with is, like when I graduated, first graduated college, like, everything I tried, like, I kind of just failed at. I failed at, like, a lot of the things I first tried, but I was kind of like, I was even more disciplined. Think about it. Like, I was even more disciplined and even more hardworking kind of than I am now. I was even more disciplined and hardworking than I was when I had, like, the most success, when I succeeded at the most things. So ultimately, you know, it's not necessarily that. I think the missing piece was a lot of, like, positive thinking. The missing piece was there. And I think if I had kind of that positive thinking years ago, I would have been able to be more successful at a younger age. I mean, there's people that, you know, became millionaires when they were 18 years old, 16 years old. I mean, you know, even somebody, there's no way that they could have worked as much as somebody who's been working, you know, 40 years, 12 hours a day or 10 hours a day. You know what I mean? There's no way that would have been kind of possible. So there's got to be something missing there. And I think it's kind of that positive thinking, that law of attraction, that, you know, think about, like Jake Ducey said in the video I was mentioning earlier, you know, what would it be like if the best case scenario happened? You know, what would it be? Because you don't know, you know, you really don't know what's the best thing that could have possibly happened. His example was, you know, backpacking around the world and writing a book about it. Best thing that could have happened was the book becoming a bestseller and being translated to so many different languages. And that's what happened. He would put the book, before it got rejected from a bunch of publishers, and he would put it in the, he would bring it to a Barnes & Noble and put it next to, I think, Wayne Dyer's book there or whatever, just for visualization, and kind of leave it there or something, just to pretend. I know, whatever you got to do. I mean, Dan Pena says, you know, you know, he was wearing suits he couldn't afford before he got them. And the example I want to leave you with, I know Andrew Tate or Tristan Tate, one of them, said this, and a lot of people have said this. Andrew Tate, like, bought a $5,000 watch. He didn't have much money, and I think someone was, like, mad about it, and he was like, why would you buy that? It's stupid. And he said, we'll make more money. And that's kind of the law of attraction there. I know it sounds kind of stupid, like, why would you buy a $5,000 watch? Sometimes people need that certain amount of mental things to kind of, you know, bring about, you know, that positivity, to bring about those things, to kind of feel like you are something, and then that'll help you kind of take action. Even if it's a bunch of nonsense, it helps you take action. Sometimes that's the main thing that you need to kind of do, just take action, even learn the concept, just start somewhere. I mean, in our society, everything's kind of coming at you, you know, sometimes it's just, so much stuff at you at the same time. You gotta just take one thing at a time, take action, just try to, something is better than nothing, you know, something is better than nothing, and try to get the full, you know, the full effect of certain things that you watch, the full effect of them. Don't just get bits and pieces. That's what I want to leave you on, guys. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you are new. Have a good one, guys. Share the video if you enjoyed it. Send it to someone who might like it as well. All right, guys, goodbye.